those strong words from the boss of one of the UK's leading care companies. With a growing elderly population, the demand for care homes is increasing. But is it fair for the NHS to bear so much of the strain, or should families take more of the burden? Well, to help answer that question, I'm joined now by Sonia Sodha, a journalist, Dave Clements, a writer and advisor on social care policy, Rebecca Wilcox, a broadcaster, and rejoining us is barrister Sophia Cannon. Well, Sonia, I'll start with you. We expect families to take care of children. Nobody would ever doubt that. So why is it different when it comes to older relatives?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that families already do a lot of caring. So I think the latest study that there was found that, family members put in over 7 billion hours of caring for elderly relatives, elderly parents. There's a lot of it that does go on.
But a huge amount are in care homes. So
yeah, lots are in care homes. And I think when you're looking at people who've got, say, advanced dementia, very serious physical impairment, these are not conditions that family members without professional training can care for people sort of round the clock. And we are really talking, for some of these people, some older people need round the clock care. And it's just not, family members can't do that. Family members can't give up jobs altogether.
But what about those who don't need round the clock care? They're just elderly and a bit frail.
Yeah, well, actually, I think what you'll find with our system is that with the significant cuts in funding that we're seeing, older people, even when they've got quite significant levels of care need, are not always getting the support they need from the care system. So Age UK, for example, estimates that there's now over 1 million older people who, don't get the basic help they need with really, tasks like washing and dressing, eating. It's a really, really sad, state of affairs. But it can't. Family members need to do their bit, but it cannot all be left to family members.
So, Sophia, you're a working mum. Many men and women in a relationship have to work to pay the mortgage. It's modern life, isn't it? How realistic is it to expect families to look after the elderly?
Well, I think we've got a new situation in our society, which has probably just come on in the last 20 years or so. First of all, it's demographics, and I call it the Grandpa Joe scenario. We all remember watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder version, where there are 4 grandparents all sitting there in the living room, all tucked up in that double bed. Demographics is now suggesting that we're going to have 1 grandchild for 4 grandparents. We, as the nation, we with families and we with houses, have to adapt. If you've got a teenage child in your house, in the next 10 years or so, that child is going to move out. Why not think about a family plan and bringing back the grandparents into that household?
Rebecca, the idea of families doing more and caring for the elderly, isn't that just the state getting out of its duty? I mean, those people have probably paid loads of taxes.
I don't think so at all. I mean, I'm Jewish, and in my community, it is so the norm that you bring Granny to live with you. You respect your elderly relatives. You see that they have something to give, that they're not... We're saying the elderly as if it's a demographic that we need to do something about, that it's a problem. It's a source, a resource of wonderful experience, and not least childcare, if you're going to be really pragmatic about it. Myself and all my friends, we use our grandparents to do childcare because it's so expensive, and who better to look after your child than grandma?
I do think there's a difference between, a grandparent who's really healthy, doesn't have advanced care needs, obviously can help with the childcare. There's something lovely about intergenerational living there, but I think we do tend to fetishise some cultures, like some Asian cultures, where we say, oh, they do much more caring within the family, and isn't that great? If you look at a country like Japan, for example, they didn't have a system of care homes before 2000, and they had huge problems with abuse of older people in people's own homes, because what you had was adult children unable to care round the clock for people who basically needed round the clock care, and it led to a system where, family relationships were really breaking down. You've got to have the state to provide a minimum level of basic support.
Well, let's focus on the cultural differences. Samantha, who are you talking to?
Well, I'm joined now by Dalwinder Bansal, who cares for her mother at home. Good morning, Dalwinder. Thanks for joining us. Now, your mum's in her late 70s and she can't be left alone at night, and you're juggling caring for her with your own job. What do you find the hardest about doing that?
Well, I think there's a number of... my mum's in her late 70s, and I transitioned from being a young carer to an adult carer now, so I've been caring for her for about 30 years, along with my sister and some siblings. So I think one of the most difficult things is actually juggling, because although I do work, I've got a senior position as well, so it's about holding down a senior position within a company it's about well-being, but it's also about having a full and social life as well. So I think there are sort of challenges around being able to live a life whereby you're living a bit more of your own life and not having to think about somebody else. So there are those challenges.
Have you ever considered looking for a home to care for your mum?
I'd never ever consider putting my mother into a home unless, like one of your guests has just said, about advanced care needs. Because I think, so I'm second generation Asian, and for me, I think that generation, the pioneering generation, they sacrifice so much. And I've seen how my parents sacrifice so much for me to have the life that I've got. And so it's not something I would ever consider. And I think a lot of people who are my age, who are also second generation, would also agree with me on that a sort of the philosophy of growing up and seeing our parents care for their parents is now ingrained within me, for sure, and other people who have seen the same sorts of things. So I think it's very much a case of families who have the capability and have that family structure whereby they can take more responsibility for looking after their elders. They should do that. I don't personally think it should be just because you paid into the tax system doesn't mean that you're going to get the care that you need. And I think that it's a very complex and multi-layered situation, and everybody's situation is different. You might have family members you might have elder people in the community who don't have that structure around them, and they do need that support. But wherever there is a family structure to support an older person, regardless of your culture and background, I think that 100% effort should be made by those families to look after their elders.
Thank you, Dalwinder. Interesting first-hand account there, Sean.
Yeah, fascinating to hear Dalwinder there. Sonia, so Dalwinder feels it's her duty to look after that generation because they were the pioneers. They were the first people to come here, and that she's second generation. Isn't it a poor reflection on our society that many other people, other cultures, don't think that?
Well, I do think that, I mean, when I think about my own parents, I think I feel similarly to Dalwinder, but not all adults, not all older adults will have that system that they can rely on. We know loads of older people feel very isolated and lonely because they don't even get visits from their families. There are also increasing numbers of older people who won't actually have children. Yeah. They won't have that family structure.
Due to the war as well.
Well, and that's a really big social issue. So I think the state needs to provide a basic safety net. Families absolutely have to do their bit, but we have to recognise that because of modern living, some people aren't able to have children. Some people's children might live on the other side of the world, in Australia, for example.
The society is judged by how older people are looked after, and I don't think it's just children. I think it's community. I think
absolutely,
look to your neighbour. You know,
no,
it's
I
not
totally
just
agree with you.
If you're lucky enough to have children, or you know, as I slept very badly last night, unlucky enough in my case.
Okay, well, when people can't rely on that, they rely on social care. And Dave, you've worked on ideas to improve social care. If we funded care homes better, would the system be better?
No. I think there are two crises in social care. There's a funding crisis, there's a crisis of affordability. Care homes are having to pay their care workers the national living wage now, which they certainly should be doing, or paying them more. But that's not the core crisis. For me, it's more about care itself. There's a crisis of care in which, you know, we hear these cases of people being neglected in care homes. The conditions in care homes are reportedly very poor.
Isn't that just money then? Shouldn't we just spend more money?
No.
So
I think some of these things are, you know, sometimes it's peeling wallpaper. It's, you know, very basic stuff. It's pot plants left to rot.
So how can we change that?
There needs to be a change in the culture. At the moment, we have an audit culture. We have a focus on targets, you know, pleasing the inspectors, meeting objectives that are external to the care home. I don't think that's a helpful way to proceed. I think what we need to be doing is involving people who work in care homes much more in the decision-making, and also people who live there. It's a partnership between the two.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually, because I think if you look at our care home system, the philosophy that runs through it is these are older people who started the process of physical and mental decline. So our job is just to sort of manage that process, and sometimes a very miserable way. And it is all about managing risks and thinking, how can we keep these people physically safe for as long as possible? It's absolutely not about how can we help our older people to live flourishing, fulfilling lives. And I feel like in our culture, we basically write older people off once also started that process of decline. We're like, right, just got to make sure they're physically safe until they meet the grave.
So Dave, it's a collaboration between families and care homes and the elderly.
It is. I think there's a myth that that older people are a burden on families, and that's the way they see them. But that's not the case. Like, care homes, only around 3% of 65+ older people will use a care home. The majority of people have care brought into the home. So, you know, it does have to be a collaboration. And I think we just need to get beyond this notion that older people are actually blocking beds, you know, etc. It's not a helpful kind of context for the discussion.
OK, let's find out what people are saying at home. Social media, Samantha?
Well, some fair agreement with the panel. Susie says, I'm definitely in favour of families caring for a relative unless they have dementia, which can be very tiring and frightening. We live in a me society and it's time to go back to caring for our own families. Catherine says there should be more emphasis on family ties and duty rather than this shove them in a home as they're a burden mindset, which is unheard of in other parts of the world. Doreen says, if you love a person, then of course you would care for them. Age does not matter. The people now older once gave great care to the young ones in their family. Natalie raises a question which does come up in these kinds of debates. She says, I've been increasingly interested in the moral question, should people who are not personally willing to help people in old age whilst they're young be entitled to expect other people to care for them when they reach that state? I don't know what the panel think of that, Sean.
Samantha, yeah, thanks. Rebecca, we need to change the mindset, do we not? When you bring up children, you put time and energy into it, and when you see them walk, when you see them go to school, you get pleasure from that. Should we not be thinking in the same way as Dawinda did, in terms of elderly people?
Well, parental instinct works very well to make you mother and father a baby and look after that child, because you can see how vulnerable it is. And the issue that we have with older people is that they are very vulnerable too, but they quite often don't have the charm that a baby does. So you don't want to launch in there and help, and you don't want to go round and assist with it. When a new baby is born on your street, everyone goes around with food. But when there's somebody older and it's winter and they haven't been outside for goodness knows how long, not many people are knocking on doors to help in the same way.
Let's bring Dawinda straight back in now. Dawinda, the children have a lot more charm than elderly people. Do you ask yourself that question every day?
Well, I actually look at it as an honour to look after my parents, actually, because they've cared for me to be who I am today, so why should I not give that back to them? But I think there's this thing where when you're looking after children, you always know that they're going to transition out of that. Whereas with older people, you know that there's going to be a decline. Things are going to get progressively more difficult. So I think that's kind of the difference. But the other thing to add in here is about the understanding that we have from our employers. And I was very lucky and fortunate to have managers who have always understood my personal situation and have given me the time off when I've needed it. They've been very understanding. And I think whilst we're looking at care homes and we're talking about money being pumped in there, I think it needs to be...
Dawinda, I'm afraid we are running out of time, but thank you very much for your comments, and thank you very much to the panel as well.
Great. Now, over the long bank holiday,